Let's welcome Fenway Jones and Gail Simone to Dragon Talk. Yay!
Yay!
I'm so honored to be here.
We're honored to have you here, to have both of you here.
Yes.
Two legends in the D&D community right here.
That's right. Fenway, you are here, because we are going to be raising a lot of money through Jasper's game week that is coming up, and we'll talk more about that. And then, of course, Gail, you're going to be playing in one of those games in support of it.
It's so exciting, but it's also terrifying to play online. I've only done it once or twice before, and I always feel like everyone else is so awesome and amazing, and I'm just like, wait, wait for me. I'm super excited.
I think that's a universal fear of playing online. No matter who you are, you're just always going to think everybody's going to be way better. And I will not know what a D8 is. And I'm going to spend like 10 minutes going through my dice trying to figure it out.
It's like, you're asking me to do math?
Yeah.
Usually when I play this
live
math.
That's always compelling content when people are like, what's 6 + 4?
It's educational.
Okay, I can do that.
It's educational if you have the kids watching.
You got a leg up on me. That arithmetic is always hard.
It's been a while. This year has taken all of our math skills.
Oh my God, all of our brains. So had to numb ourselves to make it through.
Seriously. So I'm noticing that this is Jasper's game week. Mm-hmm. When I remember back in the day, it was a day.
So the charity actually is still named Jasper's Game Day. So that's our overarching name. This is just the event name. So Jasper's Game Week, it is now actually April 30th through May 11th. So it's a little more than a week.
Yeah.
But we have games going on all throughout those days, and I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, and it's so great to bring attention to the fundraising that you're doing in order to combat or reduce the effects of suicide on people, and to get them the resources they need to have it. And I love the whole you're critically needed for someone out there. Like, I love the whole message around the entire event and the charity.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you so much for doing this. This is just incredibly meaningful to a lot of people.
Yep, it is.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, that's our goal: reduce the stigma around talking about suicide and suicide prevention, so that we can continue to help people, suicidal ideations, as well as who are going through a suicide loss.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this entire charity was born through, that personal journey for you, right, Fenway?
Yeah, it was. About 3 or 4 years ago, I lost 2 friends to suicide within the span of a couple of months. And I didn't really know what to do with myself, to be honest. And I wanted to be able to use the pain that I was feeling to create something positive. And one of the people that I lost, his name was Jasper, and he was my gaming partner in crime. We went to conventions together, played D&D together. And, so I decided to use Jasper's Game Day as a way to honor him and as a way to bring suicide prevention to the gaming world.
But you were 14 when you started it? Greg and I were talking about this before we started this interview. I remember myself at 14, and I was not that motivated or that self-aware, or just hearing you talk and say you wanted to take your pain and turn it into something that would help people. How are you able to do that? I think there's adults that would like to know, just asking for a friend. How do you do that?
Well, if I'm being completely honest, I cannot claim that I did it by myself whatsoever. My mentor, Team Phoenix, helped me a lot, as well as my family did. And Jasper's family was actually involved for a little while too. And so, just having that community support and having those people behind me, driving me, and only wanting to help me get to where I wanted to be was key, I think, to getting where we are today.
And that's a great message. Well, for everything around Dungeons and Dragons, right? You need a support group. You need an adventuring party to help you, but it's especially poignant when you're talking about suicide prevention, right? Because it is all about reaching out and giving the support that people need when they're feeling these feelings.
For sure. Yeah, D&D is actually used in therapy quite often for people who are depressed, who are anxious, a lot of people who are mentally challenged. They use D&D as a way to have the social experience, to be able to be there without necessarily having to be yourself. You can be a character who could be based off of yourself, who could be whoever you want them to be. And you can just be there for a few hours and not have to think about what's going on in your head.
Yeah. And it can also provide you with that safe space to kind of explore parts of your life that maybe you're not comfortable exploring in real life, but you can, play them out around the table. It gives you, we've heard that a lot from people who have discovered some really impactful, important things about themselves through the game. So it's very meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Gail, I think we met when you came up to Seattle for Emerald City Comic Con a long time ago, and I think you mentioned then that's how you and your husband had gotten together through playing Dungeons and Dragons. Is that right?
Yes, it is right. It's such a looking back on it, it's an amazing story. But when you're in it, it just it's happening at the time. But I was in high school, and I was very serious theater arts student and writer, and so I was like into plays Death of a Salesman and Streetcar Named Desire and all this really kind of heavy stuff. And I'm the oldest in my family, from a dysfunctional family. I had a lot of responsibility from a young age, and I really didn't learn how to play. I didn't realize that was missing in my life until I actually met my husband, because he has such a fun spirit, and he's funny, and he grew up differently than I did. And in fact, his, I wasn't interested in having a boyfriend. I wasn't interested in any of those kinds of things. I was very serious. I had my path. I was going to go, do this stuff, go to college, blah, 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 be serious, no play. And my husband's mother cut my hair, and she was always trying to talk me into meeting him. She felt like we had a lot in common. And unbeknownst to me, she was nagging him at home. You've got to call this girl. You guys have a lot in common. And this went on actually for about 3 years. And he finally said, first he was like, oh, well, no. Okay, then what does she look like? And his mom was like, oh, well, she's this and this, and she's got red hair. And he's like, nope, not happening. Not going to call her. That's a deal breaker.
Don't like
red
hair?
Yeah. Yeah. And so
did she say, well, I can dye it. I can take care of that. What color do you want?
Not much yet. But anyway, she just literally nagged him until he said, Mom, if I call her, will you stop nagging me? This has gone on long enough. And he invited me to a D&D game with his friends, safe, not going to hook up, none of those things. And him and his friends were just really smart and serious and talented, and being or having interest in writing and theater and stuff. I just completely fell hard for D&D, because that was everything that I think I had been missing in my life to that point. Playing, having fun, not worrying about my responsibilities, being able to forget my problems for that period of time, which I think gaming is really good for anxiety and stress, and just because it sets it gives your brain a chance to reset. And he was funny, and the rest is history. Married all this time.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, and we didn't play for quite a while because life, but now, especially the pandemic, has allowed us to really get back into it and bring our son into it. And we've just been really passing a lot of time. And I think it's been really good for all of us to, focus on something else. And D&D requires all the skills. Let's face it. It requires problem solving, math, creativity, writing, imagination, just all of it. And so it really takes you somewhere else. And I think that's super healthy especially for creative people.
Absolutely. And I have, while you were talking, I had this thought that it kind of connects what both of you are talking about, and it's from my own past. So my mom was, as I mentioned a bunch of times on here before, she was against Dungeons and Dragons. She was religious and thought that it would be, bad for those reasons as well. She tried to say like, oh, other moms have told me that their children have gotten into Dungeons and Dragons and they regretted it because they didn't have any friends and they were blah, blah, all this kind of stigma around D&D play that was there in the 80s. And what's very telling from both of your stories and mine when I was able to start playing when I was an adult, is that's the opposite of truth, right? Like you build relationships and friendships, some of which last, for decades, and
produce children, right?
And produce children, yeah, and all these things to come. And for Fenway, like having that support group and being able to work on things like Jasper's Game Week has only been, helping heal and build relationships. And I kind of just want to send this to my mom so that she can
hear
firsthand how wrong she was.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's so crazy how much relationship building goes into this game.
Well, and during the pandemic in particular, when you can play it online as well, I think it's been a real savior for a lot of people. And, I hear that all the time, people telling me on Twitter and stuff that without it, they just had nothing to look forward to. So, don't knock it. Although Scott reminds me all the time when we play that he gets so furious. I don't really DM much anymore because it feels like I'm writing, I feel like I need a break from writing sometimes. So he does a lot of the DMing and he gets mad at me because I always want to play a Hobbit fighter and he thinks that's the most ridiculous thing he's ever heard. And if we're playing a game where I can't be a Hobbit fighter, I create something that's still basically a Hobbit fighter anyway. It doesn't matter if we're playing Star Wars role playing or Marvel role playing, whatever. It's still going to be basically a Hobbit fighter just because it makes him mad.
Well, yeah, that was his fault. He shouldn't have let on like that. What is it about the fighter role that is intriguing to you?
I think for me, especially nowadays, what I play, it's just a total release. I can just go in and just be chaos and not have to keep myself together too much. I don't strategize too much either, which also drives him crazy or drives him, to be upset with me.
I love that he's in the background.
I love that little chuckle.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said a minute ago, I don't think you heard it. He said, I'm still throwing my saving throw. Talking about our marriage. Trying to throw my saving throw.
I love that. So essentially your first date was a D&D game?
It was. Yeah.
So that's intimidating. I mean, I guess you don't know what you don't know, but walking into an established game. But
I'd never played before, and he definitely was his friends, all dudes. I was the only girl there, and it just, I don't know, something about it did it for me, apparently.
This is like having a live audience. I love it.
It's been a long time since we've had anybody in the room laughing.
Yeah, that's so great.
Well, I mean, that's an important point. I mean, I think Fenway, you've had to navigate that as well, being the the only person who is like you in the group and trying to figure out. And in some ways, that makes it a strength, but it can be hard as well, even in the community still.
For sure. Yeah. When I first started Jasper's Game Day, not as much now, because I've kind of, made a little bit of a name for myself. But when I first started playing and Jasper's Game Day in general, people were like, why is there a teenage girl? Like, why does she get these opportunities? And I was like, because I worked for the opportunities. And they're like, but you should give these opportunities to me because I've been a part of this community longer. I'm like, that's not how this works.
There's always people that are going to try to bring someone down that are successful, especially when they aren't. I'm sorry that you had to go through that.
Yeah.
And I just kind of learned to deal with it as I deal with my games. I'm like, if these people are still trying to be a part of this, but are being angry, like they just want to be involved, but they don't know how to correctly express themselves.
And again,
that's a very generous way of
I know, again, she shows how self-aware you are. And yes, very generous in your thinking. I had different thoughts in my head when you're talking about these people. I just feel very protective of you. So
it took me a long time to get there. At first, I just wrote them off and was like, nope, you can't be a part of this anymore. Like, go. But after a while, I realized one experience with somebody shouldn't. Well, I take that back. One experience of this sort with someone should not create an animosity that lasts for a lifetime. And I was like, I know that they still should be involved. Like, we can't say no. They can't be part of a suicide prevention charity if they really want to be.
right.
And so, I know that doesn't apply to every situation. I never would say it did. But for this situation, that's how I applied it.
Yeah, I really that's a piece of advice I give to dungeon masters sometimes if there's inter-player or party conflict to work it out in game, right? Like, if you're going to have an argument between players, have the characters argue out as they would as characters, and then it becomes a drama that everybody can interact with at the table, rather than it just being something that's destructive and could potentially rip the group apart. And so I really like that you kind of thought to approach it like you would as a dungeon master and get people more involved in the way and teach them the right way to interact with this situation.
Yeah, it's like that's a really good, just a leadership skill. People who are seemingly against you, the way that you can turn them and get them on your side, and then they actually become an asset. And some of that is just hearing them. Okay, you can totally disagree with what they're saying or how they're saying it, but like, okay, I hear you. Here's what, let's talk about this, or like you are allowing them to be a part of it, which is kind of what they wanted to be maybe all along. And now they become allies, and now they're, a voice for that change as well. So it's very smart. Very smart.
Yeah.
Your Twitter handle is Fenway Teen DM. So you're still a teen, yes?
Yes.
But when did you start dungeon mastering?
When I turned 13.
When you turned 13. Okay.
How did that go?
Yeah. What was it? Was like, now that I'm 13, now I can get behind the screen?
No, not necessarily. It was just kind of how time worked out. I started playing when I was 11. So I played for about a year and a half before I decided I wanted to start dungeon mastering. And it wasn't because I entirely decided it. It was because my dad was one of the local coordinators way back when AL had those. And he was helping local game stores get their Dungeons and Dragons groups and game nights started. And so we were working at an old comic book store around where we lived. And one night it was like we had to run a table for 10 people because there was no other DMs that were there. And he was like, we were driving home from that, and he goes, yeah, so we're going to get you ready to DM next week. And I was like, what?
Oh my God.
And so I was quite literally thrown into the deep end when it comes to dungeon mastering, but I wouldn't have had it any other way.
So did you go through like a week training? Like what did you tell me? How did you get ready to be a dungeon master?
I don't even know. Like there wasn't really much prep that happened. Like I just read the adventure and then I kind of winged it. And I wasn't great at like running the role play yet. I was fantastic at combat. But the role play I really had a hard time with. So the first couple of adventures, I look back at it and laugh now, but I was like, I'm going to run the combat for your group and you're going to run the role play for my group. And so my dad and I would switch. I wasn't comfortable running the role play yet. So I just ran the combat for his group. And then he ran the role play for mine and we switched again.
Oh, that's cool. It's kind of like a co-DMing tag team.
Yeah.
I love that you and your dad were in on this together. That is so amazing. I don't know if there's very many people that can say that their parents are into it too.
My dad has been playing since he was in middle school to high school. And so he's been playing a while. And that's actually how I got into gaming, was I started playing with the group of gamers he's been playing with since he was in high school.
Oh, really?
And they've continued to play up to this point. And I just they've known me since I was born because that's, how long they've been playing. And so when I hopped in, they were all like, what's Fenway? So,
I bet they loved that. I bet that was really special for them.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Super cool.
Yeah. And then Gail, how did you get involved in Jasper's Game Week?
I think that we were just talking online and I was asked and I'm like, oh man, that is an amazing charity, of course, and I'm really supportive of what Fenway's doing. And so anything that I could do to help, I'm, happy to do. So that's how come I'm going to be playing a role-playing game online.
Yay!
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, she's playing at Adam Bradford's table. So
I was going to ask if you know, do you know who you're playing with? You know who the rest of the party is?
I know that Christina, who's a cosplayer, will be in the party. I'm not sure who else right now. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Christina Ariel, awesome.
Oh, you're in good hands.
And then the third non-auction seat for that table, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the name Gregor Shelley, but it's Tony Winslow Brill. She helped write on the Kindle Keep.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, this is a great table.
Fun.
And Gail, are you going to be a Hobbit fighter?
I cannot reveal that.
Match Gate Ball says all signs point to yes.
Our big argument is I always say hobbits are mighty. Look at what, they saved the entire Middle Earth, right? And his argument is always no, hobbits are not mighty. You are imagining that. And they are just little. And we always have this huge fight every time about hobbits are mighty. No, they're not. But I am correct.
It's
Your
all in
husband
how
fighter
you think
bows
about
to
it.
no one.
Yes, you're a hobbit with really high self-esteem, and I support this. I like it.
Well, here's perhaps a more of a tougher question because it's something I know that Fenway is passionate about, is trying to reduce the stigma around suicide and talking about it. So in honor of that, I wanted to kind of talk through something that I've been thinking about through this interview, which is, D&D is a violent game. There's things that happen that are that can be very graphic. And we've got a lot of horror themed things that we're talking about because of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft coming forward. And so how do you put both of those things in your head at the same time? Like, oh, we're going to bash monsters and isn't that great? And then, try to support people who are having these kinds of ideas.
So in the Jasper's game day, in general, all of our games, we keep all like explanations or descriptions and content PG-13. So as to not, trigger anyone in our audience. And then we also put lines and veils in our games that are just general ones for Jaspers. And those are anything to do with hurting children, anything to do with self-harm or suicide, and anything sexual. So none of those three things can be involved in the Jasper's Game Day games. And as the violence, so I don't think violence itself is necessarily what causes, violence in this manner can cause even more triggering, usually. There are always instances. But I think that oftentimes people will see it as a necessity in this sort of context. And as long as it's not super graphic, it's often a fun type of they get to protect something or they get to work towards a goal with the rest of their party. And so we usually don't do aggressive interpersonal fighting, unless it's we have one game that's going to be happening that's called Melee Ball, and it's like a competitive sport using Dungeons and Dragons rules. And so we're letting that, we'll add that there, but we don't let, super aggressive interpersonal player combat.
Well, it sounds like a lot of, good ways to keep the kind of content streamlined. But I'll throw this to you, Gail. A lot of your comic book work is pretty violent and deals with, just thinking of just, Deadpool and all of the stuff on the DC side that is a little bit more anti-heroic, I guess you could say. How does that enter your brain when you're talking also about, suicide prevention?
Well, even though I do write fiction that has some violence in it and, superhero, I also do video game writing and various other things. There's always hope. It's a lot of my stories are about found family, about, finding your true self, about starting from nothing and accomplishing things through hard work. It's not just the violence for violence sake. Sometimes violence happens to try to get to the good thing at the end, or to try to stop the bad guy from winning or, creating something terrible. And I don't usually have violence just for violence sake. There's always some story component to it. There's there's consequences. And I personally feel that fiction, when done properly, is a great place to exercise things that are bothering you. Like if a character is having a similar problem that you are, and this is how this character handles it, and this is the character's consequence that handled it in this way, and the reader will learn from that. Hopefully, was this appropriate, or if this was me, would I have done it differently? So it's very carefully written in terms of that. It's if somebody does something violent or really not for the common good, there's going to be a consequence.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that, there's always, I mentioned the Satanic Panic for D&D. There was that for comics as well. And, in movies and video games, right? That somehow there are these murder simulators that are teaching children these awful things. And I've always taken, from when I was a games critic to now, working for D&D, like those types of investigations and those stories are instructional, just the way you said. Like, it's not about, the vast majority of the material that people are criticizing in that way has exactly what you described. Like, there's the good that these characters are fighting for, and there's a lot of crap that they have to get through in order to accomplish those goals. But it's the ideal, right? It's the dramatic ideal that, like, you have to get through this in order to get to it. And if you don't have anything that has zero conflict or zero violence, then you don't even have a story. Right? So are you arguing against the idea of stories when you say you don't have this stuff in media?
Yeah. Yeah. Gail, you're incredibly prolific. You have the work that you've done runs the gamut. You've written for some of the most well-known IPs in the world. What is your writing process? Because you are writing some really, well-known maybe characters. Like, is there freedom for you to kind of, take those characters into different places, or is it all, maybe it depends on the licensor too, but what is that creative process like for you?
No, I don't usually get told what to write or what the story is going to be. I usually I've written Wonder Woman and Deadpool and Simpsons and Tomb Raider, and the list, like you said, is very, very long. So someone will come to me and say, hey, how would you like to write this or this character? What would you do? And so usually I come up with how I would approach the story. And so I spend time thinking about, let's just take Wonder Woman as an example. She's been around for, since the early 40s. There's been a lot of stories told, with her films now as well, television shows. Time has passed. We've gone through different stages in society on how women are treated, as one example. And so I'll think about the tone, modernizing it in her case a little bit. So you'll take these superhero stories and these fantastic, iconic superheroes, and you'll tell a story with a modern theme, and to bring that up to date and still keep the fun, the majestic parts of it, the powers and all the fantastic fictional elements in. But usually when you read my work, you'll find something in the real world. It'll be about, in Wonder Woman's case, the first story arc, it was definitely about mothers, daughters, sisters, grandmothers, very female relationships. And what dating would be like if you were from an island of only women and you had your own social and courting traditions, how that would carry over into our world and things like that. So that's how it happens for me. Is they'll come to me with the character, and I'll say, yes, I would like to write that. Thank you very much. And I'll propose a story and a tone and a path to take that character.
Oh, that's amazing.
Now I'm imagining Wonder Woman as a halfling. So that's my head canon now going forward.
Well, and I approach stories like that, but let's contrast with Deadpool. We'll contrast Wonder Woman and Deadpool. Deadpool is a whole different character with a whole different set of rules, and he's got different powers, and the tone is completely different. And so I would sit down and think about what I think would be funny, because that was the only thing that was really said to me, is we want to make this book funny again. And so I thought, well, he's got this healing factor. He's got cancer. This is kind of dark when you think about it. So for me, the humor is going to come from a dark place. And so I approach it like that. And then we tell stories, put him in situations where he's going to have to maybe get his arm blown off, speaking of violence, with the code to the briefcase he needs to get into written on it. And it's way across the room and he can't find it. So it's just different characters are different tones and stories.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't get boring, I guess, because you have so many
I love
different.
it. Yeah. I love it. I love having multiple projects in multiple worlds and tones. That way I don't get bored and I'm constantly challenging myself, which is important. And that's a lot of times how I make decisions on what jobs to take is, I don't usually take what's going to be easy. I take what I think maybe hasn't been done before, or, do I see it in a different way, or just something. I have to have something to grab onto.
You mentioned comedy. Like, do you bring that into the D&D table? Like, are you a comedic person?
The
kind
Hobbit
of
fighter?
Yeah, right. In general.
Of course. There's always comedy in everything I do of some sort. It's not always the same type of comedy. It doesn't come from the same place always, but it's a great stress reducer. It adds unpredictability to things, and I enjoy it. So it's going to be there. And when it comes to writing stories, it helps me create an emotional roller coaster for the reader. So I might be telling, a story like in Clean Room that's extremely horrific. And then there'll be a funny moment to kind of give the reader a little break.
Yeah.
I like being that role in the D&D table too, right? Where things are, getting crazy and, there's lots of damage, things are happening. But then,
I like chaos.
Yeah, a nice in-character joke or an out-of-character thing can relieve that tension really well, and it's a skill, just like anything else is.
Storytelling,
right?
Good. And speaking of storytelling, Fenway, as a dungeon master, what kinds of stories do you like to tell at the table?
My stories are usually it really depends. I really like role play and exploration based stories with slight bits of combat here and there. I think role play and exploration are really my strong suits. My combats, I will say, are very brutal. I do
Makes
not
the prize that much more worth it, right?
Yeah.
right. I do not go easy on people. But I really like puzzles. I like traps. I like the things that you can throw in there to make players interact more with each other, and kind of get to know them better, and sort of thing.
Okay, and so you've gotten obviously more comfortable with the role play part of. Okay, Dad's a good teacher, maybe.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a dungeon master, so I feel like both combat and role play would be challenging. I don't know. I don't know which one I would gravitate more towards.
Yeah, we've been trying to get Shelley to start, and I think that crack is now a chasm. You're going to start soon, I think.
I think I might. I'm going on vacation right after this interview, and I have packed the essentials kit. So there may be some. Yeah. Just going to bring some dice and some questions.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the Dungeon Masters are the life's blood of storytelling here in Dungeons & Dragons. So we constantly hear from folks who are like, oh, I want to start, but I don't know how, or I just got to get over this hump of getting a table together. What advice, and Gail, maybe we can go with you, like what advice would be a good start to kind of demystify running a D&D game and hopefully get more people out there to try?
I just, don't be afraid of how you're going to look. I mean, you're just get into the idea, I think, of controlling the narrative as much as you can while letting the other players, change it and be willing to be a little bit malleable so you can go different directions and then lead them back to where you really want them to be. But I think mostly it's just get over the fear of it, get over thinking that you're going to look ridiculous, have some plans, have some interesting key things that you can get the characters back to if they start wandering off somewhere that's not as interesting or not, moving the story forward. And have kind of like I always like to have a little theme in mind so that, and also tricks Like if you think that you need to kill the giant spider and then they kill the giant spider, but that spider had something that you needed. So now what do you do? So just things like that make it unpredictable, and then just weave your story as you go along. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
Okay. I the same advice, absolutely. But also, I kind of like to think of it. Start with a group that you really trust, like the people in it you trust. Maybe you're a player and you're transitioning to a DM, and you've played with them all before. Like, start with that group and ask them for constructive criticism after the game, like where they think that you could do a little bit better, what they liked, what they think that they would like more of, would like less of, like, and just kind of trust their judgment, but also trust your own judgment and realize that mechanics don't always have to be everything. Like, you don't have to spend 20 minutes looking through books for this one rule. You should make a ruling and move on. And then if you want to tell a player to look up what the book says and have them tell you, it's totally fine. But I think to keep the game moving is the most important part of being a dungeon master.
I agree with that. And also to know that your story can be about anything, really. My brother-in-law, who is a restaurateur, one time did a campaign where we didn't know till way, way, way into the game, but we were all in a giant oven. And had to try to get out. Right. So
giant oven.
So,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it was really a cool adventure. So it can just be, you don't limit yourself on things that you've seen before, because I thought that was pretty clever.
Write what you know. That's what they say, right?
He's like, I know what the inside of an oven looks like.
But no more.
Meat locker. Yeah. People always say, like, play with people that you're comfortable with your friends, with your adventuring party. But I keep thinking, I want to play with people who are totally new so they don't know if I'm messing things up. Is that not the right idea? I just feel like they won't. But then I'm responsible for their one D&D experience.
Right.
Which could go sideways.
I think after you've DM'd at least a couple of games, new people are always a lot of fun, but also new people require a lot more help than oftentimes a new DM can provide.
That's true.
Because they're going to want to know all of the rules and know everything about their character. And if you haven't, one, played the character before, two, know all of the rules, as a DM, that can be kind of like a blocker for yourselves. And making the game, it might still be a lot of fun for the players, but you might not feel as proud of yourself because you didn't know that rule. You didn't know what the character could do. And so you might feel much more down about yourself. And so I think the DMs who are comfortable with at least most of the rules are great with new players. New players are fantastic and lots of fun, but I also think new DMs and new players together, it could be a great mix. But also, depends on your outlook on things.
It would be the blind leading the blind, I think. That's a good point. The new players would actually, require some help. I told my son, he's 7, and I said, we might play D&D this week when we go away. And he was like, cool, okay. And I said, I'm going to be the dungeon master. And he goes, oh, but Dad's so much better at that.
Aww.
I'm like, way to take a hit, kid. Oh.
He doesn't even know.
Well, that's what I said. I'm like, you don't know. I've never done. You don't know what I'm like as a dungeon master. He's in trouble now, I'll tell you right now.
I was gonna say he's gonna have a rough time.
Don't get too attached to your character.
Tell him I said I think you're a better dungeon master than Bart is.
I will, because he does respect you very much, Greg,
That's all we
and
need.
your opinion.
And you know, Bart always needs to be knocked down a few pegs as well, I think.
I know, so cocky. I'm such a good dungeon master.
Well, we are, very excited about, the initiative here around Jasper's Game Week, and kind of, wanting to just bring it back to that kind of subject. It's something that I think is, super important to raise funds for and to reduce the stigma, as you're talking about. Is there anything beyond all that we, as kind of community members and humans, can do better around, helping people who are hurting in this way? I throw that to you, Fenway, but what do you think?
Sure. So one thing that I would kind of throw out there, and obviously I'm not a professional when it comes to the mental health world, but one thing that have learned in all of the safe talk trainings that I've taken, which is to teach you how to talk to someone who has suicidal ideations and who is dealing with those thoughts. And it's just more the idea of not using the words successful or committed when talking about suicide, and because or unsuccessful when talking about an attempt, because it makes it seem like the correct thing to do was the right thing to do was suicide. If you say something like they had a successful suicide, which is one of the things that they teach you, like not to say at all, it makes it seem like they were a success. Like it literally says they were a success in that sort of thing. And somebody who's dealing with the depression, the not feeling worthy enough, who attempted, and having an unsuccessful attempt just makes them feel worse about what they did. And the committed makes it feel like a crime. So, just kind of steering away from those terms and using died by suicide and just attempted suicide. And kind of simplifying those terms is very helpful for people dealing with suicidal ideation.
That's an important, kind of the vocabulary around it is very important, and is shifting all the time too, right? So it's important to know when, new guidelines and things pop up along those to kind of describe in the right way. But, are there any, I don't know, I don't want to say warning signs, but like things that that we should be aware of, especially in this time when, we're still very much apart from people. We don't get those normal check-ins with even our gaming group anymore.
So I will say, like I mentioned before, I'm not a professional, so I don't want to speak unnecessarily the warning signs and say something that is incorrect.
Sure.
However, I will say a way to check in with someone is if you notice something that is off. A way to say check in with them, see if they're ask an open-ended question. Say something along the lines of, I notice you've been doing this. Often people who are dealing with suicidal ideation or who are thinking about hurting themselves do that. Is this what you're thinking about? Like, are you thinking about hurting yourself?
To actually just be that blunt about it.
Yes.
There's no beating around the bush here. Just ask them straight up. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And obviously that would come with you noticing, you could do it with one sign, you could do it with multiple signs. Like it just depends on how comfortable you are with the person and how comfortable you are in the situation. Oftentimes they say use the two system method, where if you notice two different signs, that's a really, really good time to ask those questions. But also, if you notice one sign that's very, very prominent, and you kind of don't know what to think of it and it's not being explained by something else, then that's also a good time to ask.
Makes sense.
Good. That's really good advice.
Thank you for, I know you're not certified or any type of mental health professional, but just having, I think, more people talk about this is important, and one of the great goals that you've got going on here. And I hope everything with Jasper's Game Week goes super awesome. I know there's ways to, we already mentioned, to be able to donate in order to play with Gail and Adam Bradford and Christina Ariel and Tori Winslow Brill for that game. How do people get involved and try to end up rolling dice and having a halfling fighter as a teammate, perhaps?
Maybe.
Named Sail Gamone.
Unconfirmed.
So I will say, when this comes out, the auctions will have already ended.
Oh, okay.
So that is, they are ending on the 18th. So, but the people can get involved in a number of ways. So we will have Tiltify rewards open for every one of the games, where people and viewers can watch and donate through Tiltify to affect the game. And then we also are going to be having a couple different conventions going on for the 7th through the 9th of May. With working with the virtual D&D weekend from Baldwin Games, and then we're creating our own convention that's called PopCon, and it's it's Pathfinder and Starfinder and a couple of other game systems over there. So we're kind of hitting all of our bases. But one thing that I was finally told I could announce is that with the virtual D&D weekend, we are actually going to have some things from the Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft be a kind of, previewing there, specifically the House of Lament. And, it's not part of the Mist Hunter campaign, but it's something that's going to be part of our that's what I'm excited about.
That's awesome.
That's
yeah.
exciting.
So the House of Lament is going to be a part of that. And that what were the dates for that again?
May 7th through the 9th.
Awesome. And Gail, thank you so much for being on here, as well as talking through all of the awesomeness and being involved in Jasper's Game Week. I think that's really awesome, and I think more people are going to be aware of what's happening because of your involvement.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm really honored to have been asked to be part of it. And so let's see if we can do our small part to help some people.
Absolutely.
You already are, definitely.
Thank you so much, both of you. And, there's tons of more information about this in the show notes. And we are in support of everything both of you are doing. And so just thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. And come play with us.
Yes, thank you so much. And just one thing I want to throw out there before we end.
Sure.
JaspersGameDay.com is our website. And remember, you are not a critical failure, and you do not have to roll initiative alone.
I love that tagline.
So great.
Yeah. You are not a critical
wonderful.
failure, and you don't have to roll initiative alone. I love it.